Shalom Lekulam. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our weekly Zoom program in English for English speakers, both here in Israel and around the world. And as always, we have an audience, an international audience. This is the third part in a series that we've been doing called The Many Faces of the IDF, in which we're speaking with guests who have something important and educational, informative to say about particular sectors of Israeli society, or a group of a representative group of Israeli society that have or may have a specific experience in the IDF. We've already spoken to someone speaking about Haredim in the IDF and Arabs in the IDF, two groups that maybe we don't think of as serving in the IDF. Today we're talking about a group that we absolutely do think of serving in the IDF. It's half the population of the country, women serving in the IDF, who obviously have unique challenges and experiences, and importantly an experience which has changed and evolved over time. So to speak with us, we really have a very special guest. We're really honored to have with us retired Colonel Miri Eisin, who these days serves on the faculty of the Reichman University in Herzliya, where she teaches graduate and undergraduate students and is an associate at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. She's an intelligence, security, and diplomacy expert and an international public speaker. She's a frequent commentator on these issues in world media. She served 20 years in the IDF. She was an intelligence officer in combat units, assistant to the director of military intelligence, and deputy head of the Combat Intelligence Corps. Since retiring, or after retiring, Miri Eisin served as the Israeli government spokesperson during the Second Lebanon War in 2006. When I first encountered her, by the way, because I was working at the Israeli embassy in London at the time, and Miri was the person that I always saw as the go-to spokesperson from the Israeli government, and she was international press secretary to Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Miri Eisin, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely a pleasure, and my goodness, what a large gathering of people you have here, Paul. Very impressive. It's
even bigger. We have people watching on YouTube. They'll watch the recording later. We always have a good group. Okay, so since the IDF was established in 1949, it's one of the very few, I think, militaries that has had compulsory or pretty much compulsory service for women from the get-go. And it's the unique, I think we've all seen pictures of women in the pre-state militia, in the Haganah and other things. It was, the Zionist movement was always kind of egalitarian in that way. You served for 20 years in the IDF, including in very senior roles. Can you tell us something about your personal experience? What's it like serving in the IDF as a woman then? Maybe you can say a little about how it might have changed now, but also especially your experience of climbing the ladder of seniority as a woman.
So first of all, thank you and good evening to everybody. Paul, we need to add in also a little explanation for my American accent that comes so nicely through as this colonel in the IDF. My parents immigrated to Israel over 50 years ago. I'm from a bilingual household, kept the English, gained the Hebrew. I'm just adding that in because I am very, very Israeli. And I think even when especially I'm talking about the military, a lot of times I'm translating. So even though I sound so American, I'm actually translating because for me, military is something that you do in Hebrew. I was drafted at the end of high school. I want to say, hi, my name is Miri. I was drafted at the end of high school, which is the regular norm for those who are drafted at the end of high school. Meaning in the Israeli system, you meet the draft before you are actually drafted. You get draft notices. And here I can already say that there is a vast difference between how I was drafted many years ago, literally over 40 years ago, and to way for example, my kids were drafted in the last few years, but here I'm going to be specifically talking about women. When I was drafted over 40 years ago, women were in a separate, complete corps. It was the Women's Corps. And even when you were drafted and you served in, and I was lucky in that sense at the time that I was drafted, 95% of the women drafted at the time went to clerical positions. They were the clerks. Remember, once upon a time, typewriters, telephones, getting phones, very different from today. And I was in that small group of 5% of women at the time that I went to a professional job. It's both my English, French, Arabic, it's the languages. And I think that at the forefront of the egalitarian, this isn't equality per se, but that aspect of let's take advantage of everything that Israeli society has to offer. The first ones that really opened the doors was the intelligence community. That I'm not saying that they were egalitarian blind. I mean, I never know what the term would be, but they were very open to the idea that women bring into the room qualities and capabilities that they need, and it doesn't matter men or women. Gender is not the issue. So I was drafted into military intelligence. I was very insistent on my desire to go to officers course. Just to give you an idea of numbers, many, many moons ago, when I did officers course and I finished in 1982 before the first Lebanon War, we were 9 women in officers course with 150 men. So yeah. So the IDF is very protective of women. Everything is separate in the sense that all of the facilities, everything is different. But what I did in the military as a military intelligence officer was the exact same position as the man. And I did that literally from the moment that I finished officers course for my entire professional life in the military. Sadly, not just in the military, but also in the military. I've been the only woman in all of the positions that I did without a single exception. I was the first woman, and I literally did an entire career where I was the only woman in the room. Very professional within my own aspect of military intelligence, but I just did. It was kind of like, I like this job. I like military intelligence, and as I said, it's a professional arena where there was no question that comes up in other aspects about the differences, let's say, just even in anatomy. But no, in military intelligence, that's not about it. And I did literally every type of position you can do in military intelligence. And in all of them, I was the first and only woman. It's 2023. And I say, sadly, Paul, that in a lot of the positions that I did, not only was I the first woman, and at the time, the only woman in the room, there are a lot of positions that have not been filled since then by women. So I absolutely broke every single convention, but I can't really say that I opened up a lot of doors. I think that the doors since then kind of closed. You can open them again. But in military intelligence, you really do have quite an egalitarian mode where certainly at the beginning stages and at the lower levels of officers, you see an enormous amount, 50-50 gender-wise.
So when, if that's the case, what do you think, why do you think more women don't? Is it just the sort of, I don't know, some of the same reasons why women don't take senior positions in other roles because they're thinking about having families and that kind of thing? Or is it, are there blocks? Are they discouraged in some way? I'm just speculating, but what's the
speculation is good. That's part of where we are. So I'd say that 40 years ago when I went on my road, and 30 years ago, and 20 years ago when I was the first woman in military intelligence to get full colonel, and when I was in that sense within those positions, I think that society in the 20, let alone 21st century, pose a lot of challenges, not just for women per se. I think that in that sense, there's a sense today. And Paul, I mean, in that sense, I'm sure that you can relate to that both men and women partners want to be more involved in their families. So it becomes a question of how do you balance a very intense position with your own family life, your own type of, how do you do that? And I think that the answer at the end is very personal for every single person. I feel very blessed. Not only do I have an amazing husband who happens to also be a retired colonel, and we met within the military, and we're both in military intelligence. We have 3 kids. All 3 right now are doing their compulsory service. 2 boys and a girl, 2 officers, and one who, no pressure within the house with 2 colonels and 2 junior officers, and now number 3. It's like no pressure about going to officers course. But I do think that that difference for women still does exist. The military profession is still a challenging kind of profession that women don't necessarily gravitate towards. So I'm not about the equality in numbers at all. I'm more about, if you want to do it, that the road is open, and not that, oh, it has to be 50-50, same amount of people.
And I before I continue, I wanted to just tell our audience, just to remind you that I'm going to speak for about another 20 minutes or so, and then I'm going to turn it over to questions from the audience. So please write those questions into the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Just to continue a little bit with your personal story, Miri, when you were in these senior positions as this sole woman, lone woman in these situations, you obviously had men working in levels below you. Was that ever an issue? Did you ever feel resistance, or or was it just the professionalism of the army and the sense of duty sort of overrode any, I don't know, prejudices or maybe just sort of general sensibilities that people came with?
Isn't it funny, Paul? It's like, isn't that nice, that utopian world you just described that does not exist anywhere in any place, okay? Even people who are very aware don't usually have that amount of capabilities. Inside the military, in the years, I saw the changes that happened within the IDF. I lived through them in that sense. Yes, I was the one who broke a lot of ceilings along the way. And you do so, you learn how to meander within all of the different challenges. You asked about people who were subordinate to me. I never felt a problem there. I found much more challenges when we were talking with people who were the same rank as me or with people above my rank. I think that one of the things that women meet, that I think that women meet more than men, and in that sense, it's a gap and it still exists, is that they never seem to accuse men of sleeping with the men to go up in the ranks, but it's a given that you're going to say that about a woman. And, oh, if she got her rank, oh, we know. And it's like, thank you very much. I'm actually very professional at what I do. There are lots of lovely ways, by the way, that you can put that into words, and the military is not known for mincing on words or for saying them in a nice way. And so you get that from all around. Certainly when I got colonel, or when I got lieutenant colonel, it was like, why you and not the others? And I'm like, why not me? I'm just as good as the others, if not better. So it's that kind of sense you do feel. But that has changed over the years. I mean, that's certainly something that I feel that the younger generation of high-ranking officers right now in the IDF have much more understanding and willingness to talk about their own balancing life, what do we call it? The balance of life, work, whatever, in a way that 20 or 30 years ago, I would walk into a room and you would have people around me go, why are you here? Why aren't you with your kids? Okay, all of you amazing people listening to me right now at the begging center, what do you think I answered? I would look at all of the men and I'd say, I don't know. Well, why aren't you all with your kids? And they don't like that answer, okay? And it's like, oh. And I'm like, you can't come and do that at me in that sense. I do a position. I'm doing it well. Did you ask any of the men here why they're doing it? So it's a balance that you get to. I do feel that I have an advantage in the fact that I have a lot of self-confidence, probably over self-confidence, but in the sense that when I knew that what I was doing, I was very good at my position. And that gives a sense of confidence that I felt was something that helped me to go against it, because you could just talk about the different aspects within Israeli society and within the military on how women can be viewed on all of those different aspects.
So you said at the beginning about how women were initially in these clerical roles, and then obviously intelligence opened up as an option, which you seized with both hands. But what about combat positions? Because today we read about women in combat roles, and there's the famous case some people will know about of Alice Miller, who wanted to do the pilot's course and was told she wasn't allowed, essentially, because she was a woman, and she went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that she could, and that sort of opened the doors in many ways to this sort of to legally recognized equal access for women in the army in these ways. What do you have to say about that? How that's developed since that I think it was the early 90s, right, Alice Miller?
So I'm going to fine tune a bit of what you said, just in that sense, so that our audience are all on the same page.
Please.
When the state of Israel was established and when the IDF became a draft military, then 1948, I have lots of books behind me, right? Okay. At that time, the state of Israel said, okay, we're going to draft the women, but we need to protect them. And that was, and I'm saying this now to the audience that's listening to us now. I have 2 sons and a daughter. And yes, there is an aspect, certainly within a hierarchy, within a system like this, that you want to protect anybody who's vulnerable. And in this case, certainly in a military hierarchy, women in draft, and as we call them in Israel, girls, right? That's the sort of thing that you really want to protect. And from 1948, as I said, they put the women in a separate corps. And when Alice Miller, whose mother was also very involved in that whole aspect of what you were going to do, she presented to a trend. The Supreme Court did not tell the IDF that they had to let Alice Miller go to pilot's course. That's like something that a lot of us think. It came to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said to the IDF, why are you not allowing women, not Alice Miller? I mean, it was Alice Miller. Why are you not allowing women into pilot's course? And Paul, the funniest thing is that the opening of combat units in the IDF started because the Israeli Air Force took it seriously and said, why don't we open pilot's course to women? And they went and opened pilot's course to women. Meaning it wasn't that the Supreme Court told them to do so. The Supreme Court asked them, why don't you allow? And then it was supposed to go back and forth. It left the legal stage. It went back into the IDF, and the IDF, starting by the Israel aircraft, when it comes to the combat, said, oh my goodness, we are not utilizing 50% of the population. We're not using the human capabilities that we have. Flying an airplane is not about lifting up 150 tons. Somebody else does that. It's about reactions, capabilities, your state of mind, calmness, proactivity, multitasking. Need I say more things? I'm like, so it's not about gender, and it's not about the anatomy. And so they opened up pilot's course. That was the first thing that was opened. From there, during the 1990s, and we're now in 2023, there are last havens. I don't know if that's the right word, because a haven means that it's better, right? Okay. There are last bastions of resistance that say we won't take women. And overwhelmingly, it's about the physical aspect. And that's one that I can understand. I'll even say I can respect. I would also question that one, because we're in 2023 and military and capabilities and stamina are not about how much you can carry. You don't carry today the way you used to.
Wow. Okay. That's fascinating, because, yeah, you said that we think that the Supreme Court, that's what I thought. That was my assumption always. And from what you're telling us is that actually they just needed to be encouraged to ask themselves the question. And then they see there's actually no rationale. It's just some kind of holdover from whatever, from a former way of thinking, maybe an older way of thinking. So we, in many ways, and this is actually what our series is about in many respects, the IDF is this institution in Israel, which perhaps uniquely in Israel brings together so many different kinds of people who may not meet in other circumstances, religious and not religious, and left-wingers and right-wingers, and people from different parts of the country, even Arabs and Haredim, as we heard the last couple of weeks. But I wonder whether in the case of women, is the IDF more? I don't want to say. Is it a place that is more sort of friendly to the cause of women's equality than many other institutions in Israel? Would you say, or is it less? Is it basically just the same as everywhere else? Does it have some unique place in Israel in that sense?
I am one of the founders of a forum called the Deborah Forum, which in general is about the aspect that in Israeli society, but especially in the Israeli decision-making quarters, you have very few women, if at all. And especially when it comes to security-related matters. And you go, why? And it goes, oh, because you haven't served, or you haven't served in the combat, or you haven't reached the high ranks. And one of the aspects of Israeli political arena is that there are shortcuts into the top ranks of the political arena, is go into the top ranks of the IDF and do a little jump into the very top aspects of being within the different political parties. And I say that because the IDF is an equalizer for those who are drafted, okay? Now, the women are drafted, okay, as opposed to the Arab citizens of Israel, that the bulk of them are not drafted, and there are those who volunteer. Yeah. Or the Haredim, but let's be clear, the bulk of them are not drafted, although they get a draft notice, but the women are drafted. And if they're not given that equal opportunity in the sense that they want it, then you're closing something that has an implication for the rest of society. And I think that the IDF has been very open about a lot of things in trying to achieve. Again, it's not equality. It's not about being 50-50. It's not about that we're the same. It's about equal opportunity and about using the amazing capabilities that half the society bring into the room. And I say all about in my background, that was called the segue before they answered the question, that the IDF is at the forefront, but there are absolutely additional challenges that need to be addressed that are part of Israeli society, and they clash.
Yeah,
they clash. Let's not make this in a nice way. I want to respect religious people, Haredi people in the IDF. I want them to be drafted. For me to respect them, that means I can't command over them. Oh, are they respecting me? Do I have that equal respect? I want to respect that religious faith. Then how do they respect my desire also in that sense? These are things that clash. They don't actually go easily together. In the IDF, specifically in the intelligence community, because I know that you spoke about Netzach Yehuda. I don't know if you spoke, which is the Haredi units where it's only Haredi. And in those units, there are no women. And you go, see, that enables Haredi men to be drafted. And I go, yeah, it's going to stop women from being able to get positions because there are full units where women can't go. Okay, let's say it's not a lot of the units. Inside military intelligence, there's a whole program of Haredi married men, and there's no question it's different when they're married, where they serve in units, including with women. They're not going to be alone in a room with a woman. They're not, but you can, it's something that is out there, meaning there is a small dialogue to try and bridge those gaps, because those are part of the challenges nowadays, of those different pulling ways. There are voices within some portions of the national religious arena that are telling young women, don't be drafted, do national service. There are voices,
yeah,
and young women say, we want to be drafted, we want to serve. The military is still it's military, it's hierarchy, it's men, it's uniforms, it's all of the different aspects. Can I add something into our wonderful audience? I'm looking, we're not necessarily the young audience here. Remember that age, 18 to 22. Remember the hormones in the room when you were at college, when you were starting to, just do that first position, you just left home. Remember that 18 to 22? That's the age that Israelis are drafted. So there's no question that there is a challenge there that just has to do with the age group that's being drafted and how you align that together, let alone the hierarchy.
Yeah, that's very fair. I mean, the easiest way for someone like me who didn't grow up here and was much older when I made Aliyah is that when I was that age, I was going to college, and certainly that the first few years of college, it's very much about being that age and everything that entails. Wow, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, when I think about women in Israeli public life and comparing with different institutions, so we've had one woman prime minister a long time ago. We haven't had a woman president. We've had three of the last four presidents of the Supreme Court have been women. Do you think will we have a Ramatkal, a woman chief of staff of the IDF?
I doubt it.
Really?
But why don't we have a woman defense minister?
Right. Right.
Oh, because she doesn't have the background. She won't know how to make the decisions. I'm like, really? Because women don't know how to make decisions. It's about their womanhood. It's about their lack of. I mean, but that again, it's a issue that I'm telling all of our audience here that I am very strongly motivated about. I have a strong opinion about. I was a founding group of a NGO about this because it really drives me nuts right now. And for the last many years, decision-making inside the state of Israel about the security issues is done without any women, and it's done overwhelmingly because the women didn't serve. And I'm like, what is that relevant at all? I'll add in, we've had inside the military itself, as they opened up different things, you're seeing the rising in the ranks. But no, I don't expect a woman chief of staff. But Paul, I want to see a woman director of military intelligence. I want to see a woman, not just director of human resources, because that's the one general that we've had, and not just within the legal profession, because both the attorney general of the military and the general responsible for the military courts are both women right now. There are two women major generals in the IDF that are both in the legal profession. I want to see, I mean, like, it's the whole variety on and out. And it's not about the woman per se. It's about, there is an aspect here that's about diversity. When it hits the women, it's also about broader diversity. And I immediately know that that brings up all sorts of other, I'm forgetting the word, chashashot, other concerns.
Yeah.
And how do you balance the different concerns within? All the combat units, by the way, have built themselves where the women are. Because like, I don't know, nowadays, Iron Dome is 50-50. 50-50 men, women. And it's 50-50 at all the ranks because they just started being built really in the last decade when all of this was going on. Yeah. Iron Dome that protects us, 50-50 the whole way up, including a woman battalion commander, because they only have up to there, okay? In the artillery, which isn't really artillery nowadays, you shouldn't really call it that, 50-50 men, women when it comes to the combat soldiers, and it's going up in the ranks. Everywhere else, it's a percentage. There's always that question. So if it's not 50, but it's about the capability, use the capabilities that are there.
Okay. Okay, we're going to turn to questions from the audience. I want to clarify something first just for our audience. Miri mentioned national service. For those who don't know, and I see we already have a question about it or a comment about it. So a lot of religious girls, and I'm not talking about Haredim, but the national religious sector, the modern Orthodox, if you like, sector, a lot of the girls there do not serve in the army despite being drafted. They instead do national service, which is volunteering in various institutions and places around the country. Here at the Begin Center, we have girls doing national service. In my son's kindergarten, there's a girl doing national service. They do all kinds of different things, and they're also making a contribution. I'm not denigrating that in any way at all. So let's get to some of these questions. So there's a question here. So there's a question here from Harry about the status of Orthodox women, given what I just said. And again, we're talking about not Haredim, but the national religious. Are there any special considerations made for them? So those that want to serve, that don't want to do national service, there may be issues around modesty, or dress code, that they'll wear skirts rather than pants, that kind of thing. Can you say something about that?
The IDF does try to respect in full all of the different aspects of religious faith. First of all, the IDF is the IDF, like the state of Israel. Everything is kosher. Okay, that's like it's what the state of Israel is very unique on in that aspect. When it comes to uniforms, etc. And that you'll go out, it's something you'll physically see. Women who wear not just skirts, they can wear long skirts because they don't want to wear pants, and there is no code that says you have to wear pants as opposed to skirts, let alone long sleeves or a different kind of covering, any kind of a head covering that doesn't have to do with your beret, both for married women, for unmarried women. And as I said, the IDF in that sense is very protective about women, and I'm going to call them girls. I mean, they're drafted when they're 18, they're teenagers for that matter. It's certainly completely separate living quarters, bathroom quarters, and women in general have a voice, and that's something that the IDF has tried to put in from the other side, meaning make the commanders be the ones who implement that women should not feel that they are alone or unprotected. And at the end, they may be there in, as I said, a room with a lot of men and everything. So it's a question of how you do that. The Israeli Defense Forces invests a lot in teaching the leaders, the commanders, how to be better leaders and commanders, and making all of their soldiers feel comfortable from wherever they are. And it can be Haredi men, and it can be Orthodox women, and lots of other diversities that exist out there. Those aren't the only two ones that we could mention. Okay,
just continuing on similar lines, Jonathan asks about whether Druze women are drafted, because we know that Druze men are. And if not, do they volunteer? And also Arab, Muslim, and Christian women, are they volunteering?
Okay, so first of all, they don't get a draft notice at all. Druze women, like Arab women, okay, I mean, Arabs in the state of Israel, with the exception of the men Druze, don't get a draft notice. It's not just that they're not drafted, because the Haredis get draft notices and then get an exemption. The Druze women do not get a draft notice. They're not drafted. Until today, I know of two, count them, two, Druze women who volunteered. That may grow as a trend, but it's not there right now. It's a society aspect. There are more Christian Arab women who volunteer. It's a trend that's happening inside the Christian Arab arena, that they also want to be designated differently in Israel in general. And when I say it again, usually what happens is it's going to be a family or a village or a town, and one does it, so another does it, so a third does it. So there I know of more, but it's still very small numbers. I literally can say right now the name of the one Arab Muslim woman who I know volunteered. I don't know, Paul, if you've ever met her also, because she was in the IDF spokesperson's office, and she's an officer now. She's one. So it's not that it's a broad trend. Let's be clear. The IDF offers an exit possibility for women that doesn't exist in the same way for men, so that it's not that they're standing in line and volunteering to the draft. Those who are drafted, it's part of what they do. They've opened up a lot of different things. But people who come from the minorities inside society don't necessarily want to break their minority status by being drafted into the IDF.
Got it. Okay. That's really interesting. There's a question here from Jacqueline, who's based in the UK. She says, in the British military, there have been several cases of misogyny and sexual aggression against women in the army and the navy. How would that be dealt with in the IDF?
Wow, Jacqueline, thanks for the question itself. And I love the word misogyny. I use it a lot lately. Then again, I'm not supposed to be political, right, Paul? Am I allowed to say it about one of them? No? Okay, I'm like...
You can say what you want.
I can say what I want, right? Okay.
You can say what you want.
I get to do that, right? Okay. Okay, so here I want to use a bit of what I said before when I said that the Supreme Court, when Alice Miller petitioned the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came to the Israeli Air Force and said, why won't you draft women? In the 1980s, there was a series of horrible sexual harassment, is a nice word to put at it, within the IDF by generals. And by the way, I could say otherwise, because it's something that I teach when I teach, because I teach the conflict a lot. If you're all looking at me right now, okay, right now I am emulating what is to me the most dominant, important military figure that we had in Israeli society, and his name was Moshe Dayan. And he was incredibly important for the state of Israel, for the IDF. He was the chief of staff. He was the foreign minister. He was the defense minister. We all know Moshe Dayan. And as the chief of staff, let alone in other positions, womanizer is the nice term to put, okay? Different generation of men, of the way it was within the IDF, of the way that you really can take advantage of these young 18, 19, 20-year-old young women being drafted. The IDF in the 1980s looked itself in the mirror. And I say this because I was living through the process. I was drafted. I saw what was in the 1980s. Became an officer in the 1980s. I saw as it went on. And in the end of the 1980s, the IDF, before the basic laws that were passed by the state of Israel and then additional laws that were passed in the legislature and the Knesset, the IDF passed IDF laws against sexual harassment that are very, very strict. I'm going to share with you, Jacqueline, that sense of, I said before, I would walk into a room and, what are you doing here? Why aren't you, it's late at night, whatever, all sorts of different types of comments. And then there was the stage where I'd walk into the room and say, we're not allowed to shake your hand. You may say that that's sexual harassment. We're not allowed to come and sit next to you because you may say, it was like the draconian, very draconian laws. And I say, bring it on. Okay. If that's the way it's going to change the way that you look at that situation. So on the one hand, they pass very, very harsh laws. Jacqueline, they pass the laws because it exists, not because it doesn't exist. I don't know if I call them, they were officers that I served under, etc. Yes, I've gone through that aspect too. How do you react? What do you do? Overwhelmingly, it's something that happens to women. It's not something that happens to men. That, again, it certainly happens to men, but that's the small amount. How do you react? What do you do? How do you avoid being in a position? Because you don't want to go down. It's a very challenging aspect, but there are very draconian laws. How can I give an example? There is an Israeli who was a minister. Later he went into politics and he became a minister. And after he was a minister, he was accused of sexual harassment as a minister. And soldiers who had served under him when he was a general in the army, women soldiers, accused him of having harassed them when they were in the military. There's a Hokit Yashnut. There's if it's old, they couldn't find him guilty, but they found enough cases that they actually took away his rank. He was a full major general. I could give a list of generals, brigadier generals who have ended their military career that were glorious military careers because, as I said, I like the misogynist is one aspect to it. There are other aspects to it too. And the laws made a big difference. I mean, at the end, it's deterrence and it helps. And you want to hope that society will change and be equal and open and love. But society is made up out of a lot of different factors. So we don't have the kind of cases that you have in the UK. Not to make you feel good, but it's way worse in the United States. It's something that exists a lot more in volunteer militaries than it does in draft in general. Okay, that just draft militaries have a stricter aspect because it's draftees, they're 18 to 21, they have all sorts of protocols. When it's volunteer militaries, it comes out even worse. And at the end, yes, it's out there and there are laws and people should abide, not just by the laws, but by the morals that they should be abiding by. And in the meantime, let there be strict laws. Indeed.
Yeah, I think we can all agree with that. There's a different question here, and in many ways, I think it's one of our audience members asking a question which is sort of personal interest to her, but I think maybe of that interest to others as well. Lauren wants to know. She says that her kids, she's obviously here in Israel, her kids are bilingual, and she says, how crucial is it for English? How important is English? Do you think that English is an important tool for success in the military, and also other professions here, as someone who grew up bilingual here in Israel?
So, first of all, I think that being bilingual is called the added, it's your kids' secret power. Okay, certainly in Israel, we kind of take for granted that everybody knows English. I chose myself. My husband's Israeli, but I chose to talk English to my kids. I gave that bilingual gift to my 3 children. And it's a secret power. I highly recommend it for everybody. Doesn't matter if they're in high school and afterwards when they're in the military and afterwards when they go into the workforce and where they go anywhere in the world, bilingual is a gift. If you can do the trilingual and quadringual, whatever, I've just made up a word, that's good too. Within the IDF, it actually doesn't make any difference. It can send you into specific positions.
Right.
The IDF needs the bilingual languages. That's not just with English. It's with English, it's with French, it's with German, let alone more exotic languages. If you know somebody who knows Chinese or Korean or Japanese, or for that matter, if they know Persian or Arabic, they're going to be going in a very specific way. But the additional languages are needed because the IDF does a lot of work nowadays in cooperation with a lot of different foreign militaries. And for that, they already need people who have a level of English, which is not Israeli high school English. It's those who got the gift of bilingual.
Yeah.
And they're usually discovered before they go into the military, and very often it's what they'll do during their service.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My children are also growing up in the same way. My 6-year-olds already have better Hebrew than me, but that's another story.
Yeah, but Paul, you're giving them a perfect British accent. I gave my kids this, American accent. So
Mary, I wish that were true. They're surrounded by Americans, so they're not necessarily absorbing my British accent. Well, except when they watch Harry Potter, then they start speaking with a British accent a little bit after that. Okay. So there's a question here which is kind of, so it's off topic, and I wouldn't ask you if not for the fact that you're also an expert in security issues, and so let's utilize that as well, because Yehuda Singer wants to ask this, and I'm giving him the gift of your knowledge for this. So he says, do you feel that Israel is able to defend its military against the onslaught of world opinion, re-treatment of the Palestinians?
Yehuda, you're asking the question that we all ask all the time, and don't we all want that silver bullet answer? Well, I say yes or I say no, and I'm going to say life, she is complicated. One of the protections against the IDF, one of them, not the only one, is the best protection is the higher moral ground, and I live there. I think that the IDF is an incredibly moral institution, that it's self-reflecting, that it's not cutting off its nose to spite its face. It's facing the mirror. It's looking at itself. It's judging itself. It's being harsher than any other organization is of itself. And that's what makes it the best, most moral. Having said all of that, that doesn't mean that we're perfect, that any military is perfect. And so when you look at it from the outside in, overwhelmingly the international community look at Israel in general, Yehuda, through the prism of Israel against the Palestinians. And Israelis, and certainly the IDF, don't look at ourselves in the same frame. Right. So it's a different framing. And that's part of the challenge, not just when it comes to the IDF, but it's re-emphasized there. Meaning, if I look and I say that the IDF, with all of its units, is the Israel Defense Forces, and it serves the Lebanese border, the Syrian border, the Egyptian border, the challenges that we can have from the Gaza Strip and in Judea and Samaria against the Palestinian terror, and that's not the only thing that's there. I broaden that frame. And I think that for anybody who serves within the IDF, knowing that you have that moral ground and teaching it and teaching your leaders that and living by that, gives you more strength to be able to contend with it. And I'm not saying ignore the world at all. I'm not one of those who thinks that way, but that's a whole different issue. I think that part of that is that we also have to face it as ourselves. For this wonderful audience here at the Begin Center, and I'm talking now as a military officer in that sense, one of the things I teach all of the time is the terminology, because the Israeli military commander of the Central Command, his official position and all of the law within Judea and Samaria is out of the military laws of occupation. That's the term.
Yeah.
And inside that, because of that, you already get a framing which is very challenging, both within the military, let alone within the framework of how we're perceived. So I say, let's continue to do what we do, to be the harshest on ourselves, to judge ourselves, because we want to be on that higher moral ground for ourselves. It's not about the rest of the world.
Okay, thank you for that answer. There's a question here from Jonathan, and he preempts the question with the phrase "difficult subject." Do you agree that women IDF soldiers should have been removed from guarding security prisoners, given the recent horrendous revelations in that regard? And I assume yes, it's that same age. Okay, that's one of those challenges. That was within the prison service, where women, as their military service, like they do in border guard and in police, they also do in the prison service, and it's an alternate military service as opposed to national service where they serve as prison guards.
I'm going to answer the difficult, challenging question that you asked. And I said that shouldn't happen if they're military soldiers. It shouldn't have to happen if they are in their 18-year-old or if they're 25. That should never happen, period. If you asked before about things that are not supposed to happen, the higher moral ground, you're going, are you kidding me? Things like that cannot happen. Does it have to do with their being at that age group? That's part of the challenge of a subordinate hierarchy kind of system where you're supposed to be working at is with the commanders and the leaders who are not supposed to let something like that happen. And in this case, it was the commanders and leaders who were enabling and allowing it to happen. That's horrific on every single level.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Here's an interesting question from Dr. Nathan Ophir. He says, would you say that male belligerence leads to more military conflicts and that feminine approaches, his words, feminine approaches are more conciliatory in Israel?
No.
Okay.
I never think of feminine approaches as being more conciliatory, the word that you said that I'm not managing to repeat.
Okay.
I think that we absolutely have diverse worldviews that are not all about gender. You can have men in the room, you can have women in the room, but I absolutely think that when you don't have women in the room, you're not getting 50% of the wisdom, ideas, capabilities. You're just leaving them outside the room. And I do think that we look at things in a broader way. I'm going to rephrase, Doctor, your question in a different way. I absolutely think that women define the term national security in a different way than most men. That when I look at national security, I'm looking not just at the military, that's just one component. I'm looking at diplomacy, and I'm looking at economy, and I'm looking at society, and I'm looking at vast different, and I think that in that sense, why don't we broaden the term of what national security includes and then have that discussion in the room? And I say, sadly, I'd love men to look at it in a broader way. And overwhelmingly, when I go into the room, they narrow it down to the military. That's only one element.
Okay, I respect that. I mean, it's because you often hear, right, like in the context of political leadership, this idea that a woman prime minister or president would handle things in a different way, and you hear it from both sides. You might hear a sort of, shall we say, to go back to the word we used before, misogynistic answer of women are too emotional or whatever, or you hear actually there might be less wars if women were in charge, that kind of thing, because they're...
Well, Paul, I'm always, so it's like, it's the kind of terms that then we perpetuate them, because now we're saying that. So I think that men and women are emotional. I don't think that they're the same. And as I don't think that they're the same, I think that all of them should be in the room when we make decisions, because we're not the same. And it's men, women, and more diversity that comes into the room. And I want to see all of that diversity. I don't want to see Chad Meimadi, one-dimensional in anything. And when it comes to the military within that sense, because the military is perceived as being a very male-dominated arena, society, hierarchy, and it is. And I'm not saying and it's not that I'm for or against that. All I want within that, because you need a much bigger change to be able to change society. And in Israel, the military is an equalizer. And as such, you want to use the military as a conduit to be able to change society, decision-making, and to make a better society inside Israel, because we do have the draft. We have that capability.
Okay. I have a question here. It was a direct message to me. So I'm not going to say their name because I think they don't want me to say it, but it's off the topic of women, but it's on a sort of related topic of equality and the sort of the close cousin, if you like, of gender issues, which is sexuality, and the issue of homosexuality and gay soldiers. And I know that Israel didn't have the what famously there was in America of "Don't ask, don't tell" until several years ago. What's the status in the IDF of openly gay soldiers?
So Israel doesn't have "Don't ask, don't tell." Israel has irrelevant. And I love that. When I was drafted in the early 1980s, then you didn't know, people weren't out then, it wasn't the same so many years ago. Within my high school class, I know who is the one, young man who was not drafted because he was gay at that time. Nowadays, I mean, it's over 30 years. It started from the late 1980s and it's been over 30 years. Israel drafts everybody. If somebody is gay, and again, within the spectrum of LGBTQ plus whatever, then it's a question of the psychological impact for that person in serving inside the hierarchy of the military, and not because of the aspect of what we call gender. So that we have, and I'm very proud of it on a very specific level of it, that we don't have don't ask, don't tell, we have irrelevant. And in the state of Israel, the last attorney general, who's a major general, is openly gay, who lives with his partner, and they have 2 kids. That I could go into the IDF right now, let alone within military intelligence, that I'm smiling. It's my cynical Israeli military smile, because we joked about it within Israeli military intelligence. As I said, my husband and I are both in military intelligence, and the amount of colonels, full colonels, because it's irrelevant, and men, women, gay, I mean, it's part of what it is, that they're transgender. You can be going through operations. The IDF doesn't say, okay, no, we're not. Up to the person on that psychological aspect of can they handle it, which is a question which is asked of anybody who's drafted into the IDF, not just those who have differences in their gender. It's vastly different from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think it's to go back to my earlier point about the IDF at its best being an almost uniquely sort of open and inclusive institution in Israel in many ways. Well, I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to come up with another question to ask Miri before we say goodbye. I want to while we wait, I'm going to ask one more question, which is, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking to someone about Chayalim Bodedim, lone soldiers. What would you say to, because I know that you speak to groups that visit from abroad because of your fluent English and other things. If a young woman came to you and said, listen, before I go to college, I want to do IDF service as a non-Israeli, American or British or whatever, Jewish woman, would you encourage her? Would you encourage her with some cautionary words? Would you discourage her? What would you say?
So I'm talking right now to the parents, right?
Yes, indeed.
So to the parents, I would say, watch out, okay? It isn't about you. It's actually about the kid. Having said that, what would I say to the teenager / early young adult? I'm very clear because a lot of people come to me to talk about this. And it's not necessarily different for men and women, but with the differences that I talked about before. The Israeli military is not the college of your choice. It is not, I'm going to apply and I'll go and I'll write an essay and I'll get in. You don't get to go in and say, I want to do that. Oh, I don't like that. I want to leave. The IDF is a serious choice, which is not similar to, I want to try that out. I want to go do that. And this I say to the kids, not to the parents. Because for those who are serious about it, who want to come and do it, that's going to be part of their own life and how they view the world. Being a lone soldier, for me, I say as a mother of 3, oh my God, that's got to be the hardest thing there is, not necessarily for the kids, but for you. I cannot imagine not being around for my 3 kids who serve. I cannot imagine what it's like to be here without your parents to go home to, sister, brother, to joke about it. It's the very physicality of things. The Israeli Defense Forces are not, you get drafted and you're posted overseas and everything's taken care of. You go home on the weekends. Somebody does your laundry. You need to know where you're going back to. And so lone soldiers are taking upon themselves not just that commitment to do something where they don't get to choose what they're going to do. All they're choosing is to be drafted. They can't choose the unit they'll be in. They can't choose where they'll serve. None of that is a choice. The IDF is not the college of your choice.
Yeah.
And they do all of that together with not having their home base. So I absolutely think it's an amazing experience. It takes a deep breath. And in that sense, I'm saying perhaps to the parents, it takes support. Your kids. But these are the different kinds of things where I say at the end, it's their decision, not yours. I think they have to be over the age of 18 anyways. But wow, it's a big one, and it's not one that I would take lightly. Fair
enough. Okay. Parents abroad, if your kids come to you with these ideas, you've heard it from Miri. So we have a question here from Lauren. It's about a pretty heavy topic, but I think that's fair enough, given that we're talking about the IDF and lots of weighty subjects. She asks about suicide prevention, because she says that her neighbor's son actually killed himself while serving, and that she's heard that quite a few lone soldiers have killed themselves.
So first of all, Lauren, my heart goes out to you, and these are the sort of things that in general, about a lot of different things that we've talked about, but the aspect of suicide is the one that always hits closest to home, because when you're drafted, no matter what you do, you're going to be taught to use a weapon, so that somebody who has both that aspect before that comes into the IDF, let alone if the IDF is a harsh arena, you're having access to weapons, and that is a horrible, horrible combination. The IDF has two different aspects when it comes to, as I said before, the 18 to 22-year-olds. And this is something that has to do with the broader psychology. It's not at all about women and men. It's about the age group. I don't know how many of you are aware, but the horrific statistic worldwide is that the most suicides take place between the age of 17 and 22, which is the age that people are drafted in Israel. It's so that already is like this kind of data that you go in and say, okay, what do we do with that? So every single soldier in the IDF goes through a kind of pre-psychological evaluation, and anybody who has any kind of suicidal ideas talks about it, hears about it. It's like, that's one of those things. All of the bells are ringing. Make sure that the person gets both the condition that they need to get to talk to people and to be let out of the IDF. They won't stay in service. And sadly, you don't always catch that. You don't always hear that. You're not always listening. Sometimes they don't always say, and they have access to the weapons. It's a horrible data to say. It's horrible in that sense. But statistically, Lauren, the IDF has done very well, meaning over the last 40 years, they've brought the graph of suicides inside the IDF to a very low number, but they've never brought it to zero. And at the end, it's just one of those things where you try to get to it so that it's the lowest possible, that you see it before that it doesn't happen. And at the end, that's also about hearing the family, understanding who's about. And what I said before about the lone soldiers can only make somebody who's in a challenging moment to find it all the more challenging with nobody to talk to. So I think that the IDF is very aware. Because of that age group, there's a whole psychological aspect that goes into it. I cannot say that they prevent it completely, but they are very aware of the challenge itself and try to address it as well as they can.
Thank you very much for that answer. Okay, we're going to finish with this. We're going. We've avoided politics for the whole time, so I'm going to throw this one at you from Michael Tucker. What is your attitude to the new? These are his words. What is Miri's attitude to the new government's political interference in the IDF? And I assume he's referring to things like the way that parts of the IDF and the border police have been given over to Ben-Gvir, and that Bezalel Smotrich has some responsibilities in Judea and Samaria, which were previously always part of the defense minister's job.
Portfolio, indeed. The IDF is subordinate to the state of Israel and to the government of the state of Israel. Both the IDF chief of staff and the hierarchy underneath. Not to the defense minister, by the way. The IDF chief of staff is under the government, and not under specifically. It's something that the defense minister puts it as done. Israel's ruling over Judea and Samaria for the last 56 years, almost 56.
Yeah.
Is done through a series of laws that, as I said before, are military occupation laws. That's the way that you run a military occupied area. And by the way, that includes areas A, B, and C. It's not that it's about area C. When you're talking about being effective, part of that has to do with coordination, cooperation, talking with each other to get things done. And I'll pose all of you with the challenge that next week, the holy month of Ramadan starts. What are we today?
Tuesday.
It's going to be somewhere around next Wednesday, Thursday.
Wednesday, I think, yeah.
And when you divide the hierarchy, when you divide who does what, when it's not under something cohesive, if they talk to each other, fine. I'll ask you if Minister Ben-Gvir, Minister Smotrich, Minister Gallant, and the Prime Minister sit around and talk about it and how they're going to coordinate. The holy month of Ramadan is not about security in the military. It's the holy month of Ramadan. It's about the holy month of Ramadan for the Muslims. But the lack of because last year it was all under one. And this year it's not. And wasn't last year lovely? Wasn't as bad as 2021, and we're in 2023. And I'm just saying that because there's absolutely an impact. And time will now tell how this will come out. I'm willing to be Miri, or my given name, Miriam, right? The prophetess for a moment to say that when you don't work together, it doesn't make it better. That the way that security, intelligence, apparatus work the best together is when they sit in the room together and they talk to each other and they network with each other. And when it becomes divided for a variety of reasons, that's not going to give any of us better security. Okay.
Thank you very much for that answer, and for your time this evening. This is a topic, the general topic of women in the IDF is obviously something that we obviously had to include as part of this series, but it's also in many ways the most impactful, just because, as I said, we're talking about 50% of the population, and we all have mothers, and some of us have daughters as well. So it's I think meaningful for many of us. So I really want to thank you for. I think everyone will agree with me, not just a wise and informative, but very compassionate and human presentation and set of answers. Much appreciated, really. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you're not on my mailing list and would like to be and get information about all our English-speaking events, then drop me an email at paulg@begincentre.org.il. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Miri Eisen, yet again.
Absolutely, my pleasure and honor with the Begin Center. Couldn't be a better person to sit and talk with in the evening. Laila Tov to everybody.
Laila Tov. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Besimcha. Laila Tov.